Chevlon Canyon begins on the southern edge of the Colorado Plateau and zigzags its way towards its meeting with the Little Colorado River outside Winslow, Arizona. It is not an easy canyon to access. The ancient peoples who once lived on or near its edges built trails to more easily get to the life-sustaining water that flowed and collected in its depths. Many of these ancient trails were later used by the first white settlers in the late 1800s. Some were enlarged to allow cattle and sheep access to the water and riparian grazing opportunities in the canyon's bottom. The ancient peoples who lived on the canyon's rim made journeys into parts of the canyon, leaving their testimonials engraved on rock faces, many of which stare out blankly from another point in time. These are probably not our histories, except perhaps that somewhere on the distant past timeline, we all emerged from a common point and went our own convoluted ways. In fact, we really don't know anything about most of these markings, which is a good thing as it keeps conversations interesting around campfires. We are looking for some remarkable rock art, some even named by previous visitors. Some of the naming is pretty straightforward, like the Big Panel. Some, like Slim Jim, sends you searching the historical records of the area for clues. And some, like the Jabberwocky site, just makes you laugh a bit with its tip of the hat to Lewis Carroll. In fact, some of these panels might just be what you would expect to find should you follow Alice through the looking glass. One of the magical things about rock art is its location. The glyph makers seem to have picked some of the most amazing locations, so looking for it often leads you into truly spectacular places. At the top of the canyon trail, we inspect an area below some overhanging rocks, and are delighted to find grinding depressions in the rock floor, many of which are perched on the very edge of the canyon. There are even some very faint painted images with some of the colors still showing. All the grinding depressions remind me of some kind of communal kitchen food preparation area. Must have been a busy place. Descending the trail, we pass into shadow. It's December, and the canyon bottom is mostly dry. Walking is easier than in the summer when everything is in bloom and you find yourself wading through water in the stream bed. Many of the glyphs are easier to find in winter since most of the plant life has dropped its protective greenery. In summer, the greenery can often obscure those panels that are low on cliff faces or on rocks hidden by bushes and grasses. Our first trip here was in summer, and we hiked down canyon where we found the Big Panel, so called by an unknown mapmaker. There's been a lot of activity on this rock face through the years. We're looking at rock engravings going back on a timeline probably thousands of years. We refer to the earliest markings here as archaic, or possibly early basket maker. They are the markings of squiggly lines, possibly snakes, rows of dots, sawtooth-like designs, vertical lines that some call rakes, and other enigmatic geometric forms, the meanings of which were known only to the glyph makers. We can guess at possible meanings, and of course we will. We can't seem to help trying to explain stuff. But we will know, if we're honest about it, that we're just guessing. We can see here markings superimposed on previous glyphs, indicating not only long use, but the practical fact that the later glyph makers were having trouble finding open space on the rock surface to add their own markings. It seems each generation strives to leave a record on the rock of what seemed important to them, and after 1,000 or more years, it could have been running out of room. That's why I think this rock around the corner from the large panel is sort of an overflow canvas for the artist, as there is simply no more room for what he or she wanted to create. Pure conjecture on my part, to be sure. It's just the kind of story I tell myself looking at all this amazing stuff. This bear paw glyph, for instance, is much later in time than the geometric glyphs that surround it. You can tell it's newer, not only because bear prints didn't appear in rock art till much later in the Pueblo periods, but because the patination, or eroding, of the rock surface is lighter in color than on the surrounding glyphs. It's as if the Bear Clan glyph maker came across this panel much later in time and simply couldn't find a suitable blank spot for the glyph, so he simply used an open space within a previous glyph. My clan and I pass this way also, the glyph seems to say. And so too do we pass this panel, as there is much to explore in this singular canyon. We are going up canyon this December trip in honor of Dennis's birthday. The greenery has faded, and the rock bones of the canyon are more in evidence. We spy markings through some branches and clamber up the canyon bank to investigate and take pictures. Many of these large figures have either a myriad of vertical lines within their body shapes, or the bodies are completely formed by pecked dots. The largest basket maker figure has both vertical lines and pecking marks, about half and half, and is clearly the centerpiece of the panel. The other figures appear to be from the same time period, judging by the style employed in their creation. They all have antennas sprouting from their round heads, implying some kind of shamanic trance connection to another reality. Other figures, including game animals, were added later, perhaps trying to tap into the shamanic power of the earlier figures. Snakes intertwine among these striking figures, giving an added potency to the images and their possible intentions. Around the corner from these images is another panel that is a wonderful mix of images. We can see horned basket maker images with cross-hatched torsos, torsos with rake-like vertical lines, and torsos simply pecked. Later editions of deer and elk, and the ubiquitous handprint, are clearly from another time period. Of great interest was this row of small round heads with eyes and mouths, sporting a pair of antennas that reminded some of us of the early years of television with its indoor rabbit ears. Not everyone remembers this, of course. The heads seem to be floating, tethered by a string-like object, very similar to a balloon. One of our group takes to calling them balloon heads or bubble heads. Others agree. This was a fun panel to spend time with.
All wrapped up in 3 pots. It was sealed. Yeah.
Can you imagine seeing that? And it probably looked just like intact.
It was intact and yeah, very impressive.
There's something dark repatinated right next to it too.
Yeah, and here too, there's all the way across here. They go all the way to here, in here a little bit. This was all pecked.
Wow. Yeah.
Oh, all the way over here. Boy, these guys were busy way long time ago.
Like half a deer.
Here's a bunch of dancers, but you can barely.
They just stopped him right there.
Look at this, Dennis. These are like dancer
I wonder
guys.
whether on purpose or not. Whether on purpose or not. Oh gosh, please.
Oh, here's an elk. Here's a Bullwinkle elk.
I think they were frequent. I think this might be a row of dancers or a row of flute players right here.
Here too, Darlene. This looks like dancers here. See them?
Like they're holding on to each other. And then there's the smell.
Wow.
These look like a row of dancers right here, or flute players or something.
And look at this guy. This looks just like that pictograph did I show you where in the cave I went to?
Yeah,
But that was painted. And here's a smiley face guy.
Some of these are older and some of these are newer. And some of them are repicked, which I think is everything. All the above. These guys got their tails or paths crossed or something.
Yeah, what do you take that to be?
And
Look,
they're
here's
over.
something here. A couple of rain squiggles.
Well, it looks like they meet, and then it looks like somebody. This looks newer, that upper part, and it's on top of an older elk. That's an elk.
Wait until you see this one, Sky.
Like a trail.
We continue down canyon, stopping occasionally to scan the canyon walls for messages from another point in time. It's all great fun and somehow profound, and I'm sure that if you did this hike again, you would find something new that you missed the first time around. That's how it works in places like this. Having recently seen those small glyphs some of us called balloon heads, we were totally unprepared for the grown-up versions we now encountered. This is the Jabberwocky Panel, so called by some map maker's idea of what Lewis Carroll had in mind when writing his poem. Surprisingly, one of our group, that would be me actually, knew the poem and began to recite it.
'Twas brilliant, and the slithy toes did gyre and gimble in the wave. All mimsy were the laurel groves, and the moon's wrath outgrave. Beware the Jabberwock, my son, the jaws that bite, the claws that catch. Beware the jubjub bird, and shun the fruminous bandersnatch. He took his horrible sword in hand, long time the manxome foe he sought. Then rested he by a tum-tum tree, and stood a while in thought. And while in elfish thought he stood, the Jabberwock with eyes of flame.
This grouping of large basket maker images seems to project a heritage of shamanic connections with a spiritual realm not usually available to normal consciousness. Scattered about the panel are small glyphs of birds, dragonflies, and snakes, all seemingly connected with this trance-like imagery. The animals and insects may represent a kind of helper for the shaman, a totem thought to have spiritual significance, who may facilitate the shaman's ability to depart one consciousness and travel to another. The figures are attached by long neck-like cords to parallel horizontal lines, from which the often seen vertical lines descend. These, often called rakes, are thought to be representations of rain, so that one could infer the shaman's trance journey here to be connected with the bringing of the all-important rains responsible for the continuance of the community's life near here. Almost more dramatic are these even larger shamanic figures across the canyon, high on its walls. They may underscore the importance of a water connection, and even more telling is this included female figure that gives potency to the idea of fertility, sustenance, and well-being for the tribe and everyone else connected with these images. This is all pretty heady stuff, but if you happen to be interested in shamanic soul traveling, this might be a very interesting spot to begin your travels. Don't forget to report back. Getting back down to earth a bit, we find this quite wonderful, almost horizontal ledge only a few feet above the canyon's bottom, slanted enough we had to lean a bit to keep from falling off. After having been looking and pointing cameras upwards, we're now looking downwards at incised images. As above, so below, one might say. Now, some of us think it's time for lunch and other forms of entertainment. Fade out. We continue up canyon in hopes of finding the panel some call Slim Jim. We wonder if Slim Jim was an early settler in these parts, who perhaps was the first non-native to notice the panel. Area maps also show a Slim Jim Canyon in the upper reaches of Chevlon, and we wonder if there's a connection. We wonder just how many amazing rock art sites might be nestled in this canyon. It's a long canyon with much time for wondering. We start wondering about turning around and heading back to camp, as it's getting late this winter afternoon, when, as if on cue, one of us spies the panel.
Oh my God.
This is Slim U. So, what's your immediate assessment here?
Feast or famine. Oh, this is very dramatic and it needs shade.
This is as good as...
Yeah, beautiful sight here. You're gonna like this.
It is feast or famine, as we find two other panels around the corner that are stunningly overwhelming. A true riot of basket maker and later Pueblo images, many superimposed over previous ones.
Yeah, tell us the story about this.
A lot of religious shit going on here. Kachina's dancing. Now, are that the Bow Clan?
Well, it's like,
See,
it's
are
a
those
bunch
guys
of
holding a bunch of bows?
bows or spears.
Where's that?
These guys up at the top.
Up at the top.
That's what you're looking at, right?
Yeah.
After looking at rock images for a while, you begin to recognize a certain familiar image and even its style of execution. You start thinking things like, I've seen that kind of image somewhere before. Or, this snake with fangs, where did I see it before? We're beginning to recognize the snake, and the snake with fangs, as part of a standard repertoire, certain types of images that show up in certain contexts over and over again. We think the snake is related to water and to the underworld. It's interesting that present-day Amazonian shamans, who are skilled in the ayahuasca ceremony, report that one of their most frequent trance experiences is being in the company of great snakes. This fanged snake at Slim Jim stretches over 10 feet across 2 different panels. Impressive snake imagery, to be sure. Basket maker shamanic trance images are often thin and elongated, a certain style that you might imagine our elusive Slim Jim to look like. In that vein, there are a lot of Slim Jim candidates on this particular panel. Joel is trying to decide, I sometimes wonder if there were localized rock art finishing schools where budding artists or shamans went to learn and experience certain trance states. This shamanic image suggests an event that didn't turn out so well for everyone involved. The shaman is holding a small torso whose disembodied floating head is looking rather frightfully at its body that's being held by the shaman. You can infer or make up a lot of explanations about an image like this, but the fact is that many of these images set off ideas and you find yourself interpreting things you really have no relation to, or so you think. I've noticed that often my consciousness is affected when I'm in proximity to panels with potent trance and spiritual imagery. There's often a heightened energy here. Perhaps the rocks speak in ways we don't yet understand or remember. In any case, interesting things happen at these sites, and since the human experience reaches across time, it may not be uncommon for us to connect with another point in time on a level that may not be obvious to our conscious minds. Whatever it is, we do feel it, which is perhaps why many of us seek out these sites. One of the more interesting images on this panel is this large pecked elk. If you look closely, you can see what appears to be a human head at the front of the elk. This head is not a later addition. It predates the pecked elk, based on the rock patination. Whoever created this image seems to have included this very human reference, not often seen in rock art. Great dimple over the eye also. It's impossible to know how long a timeline we're looking at here. One generation of glyphs being overwritten by the next until everyone leaves the area for the Hopi Mesas, the Zuni Valley, the Rio Grande Valley, or perhaps, my choice, the beach villages of northern Mexico. Who knows? These 3 images are the largest on the panels, over 3 feet high. The image on the left has many squiggly lines on his lower torso, heading in various directions, while a portion of his upper torso is pecked. The figure also has an unusually thick neck. The 2 images beside it show smaller heads with thin necks that transform into what appears to be torrents of descending rain. This group of dancers holding hands makes me smile. I'm guessing rain dances due to all the lower vertical lines. What appears to be the lead dancer on the left is the only one who can see anything, or at least is the only one with eyes. Everyone else is either wearing a mask, or the glyph maker ran out of time for eyes and mouths. They all seem to have antennas, so their guidance in the dance is perhaps from another source. Maybe this is early Katsina stuff? This masked image seems to be an enlargement of the dancers, and we can see his lower body seems concerned with rainmaking. This certainly could be a mask. This panel seems to have a group of happy shamans. It seems they're all pleased about something. I'm guessing some kind of reunion. You can see how you can run on and get carried away with these images. Still, I'm sticking with a reunion. Time to retrace our steps, but we'll certainly be back.
Well, success.
Success. Thank you, Slim.
Auspicious day.
Yeah. What a
Yeah,
beautiful.
be healthy and have legs to walk.
All right.
I mean, what do you suppose lies around the next corner of the canyon? Stay tuned for all future updates. See ya.